Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox, and this one is not about Michael Matheson. Dorothy Bain, of course, is the Lord Advocate, and she is part of the Cabinet. And this kind of brings in one branch of government under the wing of another, because the Judiciary and the Executive should really be separate entities. And in most countries around the world, they are. But not in Scotland, because, of course, the Executive controls the judiciary. It's a very strange and dictatorial style. But now a former Deputy First Minister is questioning it. He says it's far too close, far too incestuous a relationship between the three pillars of governance, and that it should be separate, and that Dorothy Bain should not be part of the government. She should sit aside and external to the government. And so I think he's right. It is a very unusual situation where justice answers to the executive. Surely the executive must answer to justice. That way the executive can't do anything that would be wrong. Well, not in Scotland. Let's have a look at this, see what's going on, to see why this is a rather perverted way of running the establishment. Here goes. So, former Deputy First Minister hits out the closeness of the Lord Advocate to government amid Operation Branchform. Lord Wallace, who served as a Deputy First Minister under three separate Labour First Ministers, was asked about his thoughts on Dorothy Bain being in government and also of being in charge of the Crown Office. Well, she likes it, the SNP like it, but it is not the usual thing. You know, when you have the three sort of pillars of the establishment, they should all be individual, separate, and independent, and that isn't what's happening in Scotland because the executive want complete and utter control. Anyway, a former Deputy First Minister of Scotland has hit out at how close the Lord Advocate is to the Scottish Government. Well, she actually sits in as a cabinet member, so that obviously shows that justice is not independent from the executive, and it is a very, very dangerous precedent to set. And this is all amid a discussion about Operation Branchform. Lord Wallace, who served under three Labour First Ministers, said he was not content with the current model, which sees the role handed out by the current occupant of Bute House. He was given evidence to the UK government's Scottish Affairs Committee and was asked directly by Douglas Ross about Dorothy Bain fulfilling this role after being appointed by Nicola Sturgeon. She sits in on cabinet meetings even though the Crown Office is investigating the SNP over financial irregularities. So she, as head of the Crown Office, is sitting in with an SNP government and investigating the SNP government. Talk about marking your own homework. It's why nothing is ever sorted. But of course that was the whole point of bringing her in, so that the government could control the judiciary. Oh yes, I found myself quite innocent. Lord Wallace says, I do think there's an advantage of having a split responsibility between the prosecutorial role in terms of fatal accident inquiries, investigation of deaths, and the political role, because I think they're distinctive, and I don't think any of the holders have abused it. Well, not thinking that they've abused it doesn't mean it's not there to be abused. It's like anything. If something is there, people will abuse it eventually. Now, we're not saying Dorothy Bain is guilty of this. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Dorothy Bain has ever been tempted to do it. That, again, would be quite wrong. But the very fact that this possibility exists means that somewhere down the line, someone may take advantage of it and may do something harmful. He said, I think perceptions are important too, and I don't have a problem with the government's legal advisor being part of a party affiliation. But that's not necessarily a good thing. If you're the head of the prosecution, it could give the wrong impression. And indeed it does. When the chief prosecutor, who's investigating the SNP, is a member of the SNP cabinet, it sends out all the wrong messages. It is not good for the optics. I think justice needs to be a separate system from the executive and from the legislature. And to have any of these three pillars interactive and related to each other is dangerous and wrong. The Scottish Tory leader attempted to press Lord Wallace more on this, but was interrupted by the committee chairman and SNP Pete Wishart, who urged everyone to be careful with what they say due to live police investigations, to which Mr Ross pointed out they'd only discussed information that was in public domain. Lord Wallace was joined in giving evidence at the committee by Lord Dunlop, who was looking rather tired, and Lord Robertson, who'd been in a jam. And they had all served in the devolved governments, and I need to stop doing that, I really do. I can't help it. Anyway, they'd all served in devolved governments and dealt with intergovernmental issues, and all three condemned how the Scottish Parliament system had detrimentally been affected by the influence of the SNP. Well, the SNP, that's their polite way of saying that the SNP are a cancerous tumour eating at the body of Scotland. They're getting into every aspect of every part of Scotland and destroying it, and ultimately they will kill the body corporate, of the nation. Lord Dunlop said that he was worried about the way Holyrood had developed, and when they first pushed for devolution, that they were probably too optimistic, too much wishful thinking. He said, we've seen it develop now in a way that the committee structure and that we thought was going to be essentially the equivalent of a second chamber, because it would give scrutiny. And that has not worked out that way, because one party took ownership of the committee system that neutralised them. Yeah, they don't want to be questioned. They don't want to be scrutinised, so if they can control everything, they never will be. That's the SNP way, though, isn't it? Never question, just simply mindlessly obey. We didn't foresee the degree of centralisation that there was likely to be in Edinburgh, and that devolution was devolved to Scotland, but not necessarily to various parts of Scotland. He said, we foresaw the fact that the Scottish Parliament was going to be a discussion about some of the great issues that confronted the country, only to find out that the plenary sessions in the Scottish Parliament are now highly limited and very small. Indeed, that the executive has now become the major driving force rather than the Parliament itself. Indeed, the executive in Scotland has taken all the power. It's removed the power effectively from the legislature, and it now controls by having the legal side, the justice, inside the cabinet. And that means you've got a cabal at the top running the entirety of Scotland. There's no scrutiny, there's no questioning, there's no gainsaying them, there's no chance of turning it around until the next election. And whoever gets in, and it's probably Labour, but whoever gets in has got to reverse this, has got to separate church and state, as it were. They've got to pull the justice, the judiciary out of government, and they've got to hand total control back to the legislature, not the executive. And I know most of you, absolutely most of you will know the differences, but effectively the legislature suggests the law, the executive enacts the law, and the judiciary ensures the compliance of the law. And the three must be separate. Otherwise, dictatorship. Single party dictatorship. And that's what's happened in Scotland. So it's quite right to point it out, and it's quite right to remove Dorothy Bain, not just Dorothy Bain the person, but Dorothy Bain's position from cabinet, and make justice entirely separate, apolitical, and not controlled in any way, shape or form by the executive or the legislature. Anyway, I shall round off there, and I'll come up and we'll finish the video. It's been quite clear that for some time the SNP has been trying to centralise power. It wants all the legislature to be within the hands of the SNP, the control of Parliament to be in the hands of the SNP, the government to be an SNP government, and the judiciary to be an SNP judiciary. It then wants to concentrate it further into a small cabal at the top, until eventually you end up with the Empress herself. Her word is law, a living God, embodiment of all Caledonia, and who, unless you obey her immediately and without question, shall lead to major and severe punishments. That's what went through the minds of Nicola Sturgeon, that tiny mind, but that oh so tricksy mind, because that's what she was aiming for. That was the whole plan. Complete and utter control, and then set herself up as the grand leaderine, it seems. But it's all falling apart now. They've all been rumbled, and it will change. And they have to begin by taking judiciary out of executive control. Anyway, now that it's all coming out and we're all starting to see how bad it is, we can actually see how really bad it is, because it will be a lot worse than anyone thinks. So once you start looking at it, who's controlling the committees? Who's appointing the committees? Who's saying the makeup of the committees? Who's deciding in advance what the result of the committees will be? Because it's all done that way. And they want juryless trials as well. Wheel in the guilty bastard. He hasn't been tried yet. No, but he'll be guilty. Don't you worry. That's how it's going. It's a dictatorship. And now they're starting to wake up. The people, the masses of people like you, like me, like your neighbours, your friends, your family. They're all waking up of a collective stupor, and they're seeing what has happened to them. Long may it rain. Till next time, stay safe, stay well, and I will speak to you later. Bye.